Hello, Charlie TCG here, and welcome back to Looking Ahead, the series where I break down and analyze the meta, what's happening over in Japan, and how that could impact us. Today is a big one. We're going to look just purely at the City League results and answer the big question. Is Giratina back being the BDIF? We've seen a huge popularity over the last few weeks of the Arcus Giratina build, but could we see the Lost Box Giratina build be the strongest one there? Is Gardevoir again too powerful? And are there some surprising decks which are kind of making it into the top 8 placements? So let's jump back into the video and see exactly what the Metashare looks like. So if we look at the Metashare here, if we combine all the Giratina builds, that's nearly 25%. Nearly one out of 4 of the decks which you might face in there could be a Giratina build, which is really, really powerful to see how strong Giratina really is becoming. Although Gardevoir is still at the top place, it's still the most powerful, very consistent to hit these huge amount of damage outputs, and Iona and Reversal Energy really pushes Gardevoir to be the big BDIF in the format, but Giratina is really making it run for its money. Some of the big surprising decks here, Palkia and Miraidon have made their own little spot. Palkia, even though we see it partnered a lot now with Xianpao, we're seeing it more as an individual build. We're having Xianpao as like the Capacious Bucket, which we're used to as an item card, but having that as a Pokemon and using the discarding effects through Ultra Ball as well as Greninja, it's really powerful to see, and utilizing cards like the barrel to draw as many cards. Miraidon has been the surprising increasing in popularity. We have seen a little bit of it over for us as well by going back to the Fluffy box, but Miraidon is kind of teetering between the Regieleki and the Fluffy, sort of using those sort of archetypes. Nothing new of these big cards have been added to Miraidon, no new like big consistency boosters, but Iona can really push it to be very strong. And Duraludon, still Arcus Duraludon, Umbreon, which we saw a lot of popularity for us. It's kind of going over to Japan as well. We're seeing the gusting effect of Umbreon really utilized with the visceral strength and HP that Duraludon really has to offer. Goodra is kind of slowly getting in there, with a mixture between the Arceus builds as well as Lost Box. The incredible sheer amount of healing that Goodra can do and the huge walling effect, Goodra can be very much a problem. So cards like Lost Box and Lugia are kind of falling a little bit down. Not by the wayside, they're still always in the top 5 decks to definitely look out for. But they are falling a little bit out of the way. Lugia isn't getting the results of what we've been used to seeing as much as per recently, and it's still definitely looking the way of using the more colorless build by having Snorlax and Weirdir and the Luxray as the main attackers instead of using the single strike. So this top 8 or top 16 as the meta is really interesting to kind of get a gauge to see how you could be testing for NAIC, which is happening next month, which is absolutely insane to think that we're getting so close to getting this release. So always it's really good to see the meta is evolving and we're seeing this huge increase of Giratina. But how does that reflect the top six decks? We can see here Gardevoir got back in number 1, but Arcus Giratina went up to 2nd space. Lost Box Tina did in fact go down by 2 places. Lost Box did go down by 1. Sorry. Mew did get into 1 spot. Went up by 1 to 5th. And Xianpao is back in the game at number 6. This is really interesting to see exactly what are the top 6 decks. Big thing you're kind of seeing here is saying Lugia isn't there, even though it placed really highly in the percentage. Now you are correct with that. It made a lot more top 8 placements, and I've seen instead of wins. It didn't get as many wins as I thought it would do, which is definitely a big surprise. We're not seeing the fall of grace of Lugia. Like Lugia was BDIF for so long, people are finding out how to counter it. And to be fair, Giratina is a really good way around it because they have a lot of HP. If you put a V-Guard energy on it, they're not exactly going to be getting big one-hit KOs if we're going more to a colorless build of Lugia instead of the big single strike one, which can guarantee the big one-hit KOs. Gardevoir, as you can see there, look at the numbers. It was hugely played over the last week. The amazing strength of pretty much focusing mainly on the reversal energy because Tropical Beach, I'm thinking of the other one, Champions Festival, is a very expensive card. Over here, you're probably looking at between $100 to $300. I think the price has gone down maybe a little bit, but in Japan, because of how strong Gardevoir is, you're still looking at a good, potentially $1,000 for a card, which is insane because they had the whole Iona thing where they had to literally limit how many things you get of Clay Burst. So Japan right now, is because of how exciting it's getting ready to Worlds, some of the cards are very difficult to get hold of. But Lost Box is seeing a bit of a decline we are seeing here. But if we still combine both Giratina builds, it's incredibly high with 16 wins, which is really insane to think about. And Mew is really kind of going up there. Definitely, it did in fact obviously win a few of the regionals that did happen yesterday. And we're seeing Fusion build being the strongest build right now for Mew. So is Mew definitely back on the radar? Should we start Tekken and Drapions. So his top 6 is really good to at least understand exactly what decks are performing well. And with Shi and Pao being in the 6th spot, kind of like, I feel like it definitely is like the Miraidon. It's definitely a bit of a glass cannon. It can do really, really well for what it sets up. But because it's like so all in every single turn, you might potentially lose out on attackers, and it loses very hardly to Path if they can't use their ability. So I want to now showcase some of the fun lists as well. So we're seeing some Arctina is really sort of evolving. We're not just seeing the classic Arcus and Giratina, we're seeing Arcus Giratina plus friends. Here we're seeing the use of Spiritomb to really slow down any Pokemon basic Vs, and Umbreon. So Umbreon you can use as attacking, but it's an extra boss sort of card. We are playing a few boss, and we're playing Escape Rope as well as Palpad, but having Umbreon as a Pokemon Gust, so you can Gust plus player supporter. So you could Gust a Pokemon which you really want to knock out. Avery, the opponent might have to get rid of some really key resources. He got rid of one which they might not need to. I really like this sort of list of Arcus Giratina. Very disruptive and really helpful in your Gardevoir matchup. As they want to get these big one-hit KOs, you have Cleansing Club as well as Box of Disaster. Very, very good sort of disruptive sort of cards. Because you're playing limited of the energies, especially because you're playing the Darkness energy, now you're playing limited Grass and Psychic energies instead of the 4/4. So you're having increased potentially less attacks through Giratina, sorry about this, or potentially having more of a disruptive impact with having the high counts of Judge and Iona. I really like this sort of list for Arctina, as well as the other sort of builds of Arctina. It's kind of going to have 2 copies of Vulpix. And Vulpix is a really, really good destructive card. We saw it win EUIC. We're seeing so many Pokemon, if we look at it, with abilities. So this is really, really strong just to make sure it can wall potentially 1 to 2 maybe turns, and get into big one-hit KO later on in the game with setting up with the Giratina and potentially Arceus. I really like this sort of list. You're not playing as much disruptive cards with your stadiums, but you're still playing the Spiritomb and 2/2 line of Bibarel. Bibarel, whatever you want to call it, is one of the strongest draw Pokemon right now in the game. And having Squawk ability as well, definitely a hit and miss sort of card. You can only play it on your first turn of the game, and you have to discard your hand and draw 6. But it's really good because it's not an on-play effect. It's just any time on your first turn. We're also seeing here not really attacking too much for Gardevoir because they're using the Vulpix and having the big count of the searching cards guarantees you can get the Pokemon out as much quickly as possible. And again, we've seen limited amount of the energies because they're focusing 2 of these energies on having a lowland Vulpix. And if we look at just a Lost Zone Giratina here, we're seeing more of the attacking with some single prizes. We're seeing a higher count of Cramorant, Sableye, as well as also having 1 copy of the Snorlax. I really like Snorlax in this style of list. I think Snorlax is a really, really powerful single prize Pokemon. It works incredibly well with Cramorant or potentially Sableye or even Greninja, so you can get those big KOs that way. Set it up. We're not playing Therapy Energy here, so you will have to do the double switch, the flips for make sure it's awake, but having high counts of Jet Energy as well as switching cards like Switch Card as well as Escape Rope, you can immediately always be kind of like switching out as much as possible. I really like this sort of list. I think this is really good to really see how good Lost Zone Tina is. I think Arctina potentially could be the way forward to it. It's the one that has performed well in the regionals that's happened over in Japan. The ones that are performing well over for us as well. And Lost Zone Tina is definitely a bit more harder to set up, where if you're playing the Arctina, you can really get the big, you have Starbirth, you can get the attack out and abilities, pretty much at least turn 2, maybe turn 3, depending on how your setup goes as well. But having cards like Super Rod means you're not too worried about if you have to discard some energies early on with Greninja or switching, because you can shuffle it back in to really utilize Mirage Gate. I really want to talk about Miraidon because this is the Miraidon list as well, which we are seeing a huge increase in play even over there as well as over here with us as well. Really kind of saying goodbye to the Regieleki package and kind of going to say hello to Raichu. Raichu was kind of how I originally thought Miraidon could be built way back in like January time when I looked at the card. I went, huh, Raichu is a really, really strong card. You can get the big one-hit KOs and not rely too much on Regieleki. And I like to see we've seen that increase. A higher count of Fluffing is really, really helpful. And obviously the Charm of Courage is really good to boost up the HP of from your Raikus and Raichu to go to 250 and Miraidon to 270 HP. Very, very powerful sort of archetype. And here we're seeing Path of the Peak as well as Lost City. Path of the Peak, because you're not really utilizing on the switching effects because you're playing a higher count of switching cards, as well as these Pokemon have very low retreat,
you can afford to be that disruptive ability, having Lost City to really help in those matchups where you want to get guaranteed one-hit KO, kill a Pokemon, which they potentially could be really detrimental to your gameplay. And then Path to Peak, because you're only really having Raichu and Miraidon, as obviously you have Radiant Greninja, but if you get your setup early on, you draw the cards you might need, pop a Path in play, you could really slow down your opponent. And I really like this sort of aggressiveness that Miraidon is kind of evolving to go with. Very destructive as well, with 2 copies of Iona and 3 copies of Judge. I like this. I like this sure power strength that this Miraidon can really play. The higher count of Flapping is really, really strong. So yeah, Miraidon could be potentially here to stay, although did get a couple wins, didn't break into the top like 6, but potentially Miraidon could be coming back up to it and not really being that mid-Rhydon, which a lot of people have been talking about. And Mew Vmax, again, we've seen it do really, really well this weekend, and we've seen it do really well in Japan. Fusion build being a much stronger one, as well as having Ice Cube, which is really, really good with its attack, doing 40 damage, plus 40 more damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon for the amount of Fusion Strike energies you have in play. A very, very good sniping effect if there's no Manaphy in play, or to get rid of one of those pesky Pokemon, which can really help with your setups with your Mew Vmax potentially in the later few turns. Nothing here is a huge surprise, very limited with the Paths of Engine, but high accounts of Lost City, trying to help your Lost Box potentially if they accidentally bench your Kyogre, you can get rid of it very quickly. And having the Oricorio as well is really good to beef up the HP of Mew and NSX, really limit the amount of damage your opponent can do. That's one thing I do find a surprise, is a high count of Forest Seal Stone and low count of Stadiums, which we haven't seen in a while for Fusion build. But because there's so much that needs to go into this, you have to really sacrifice a few cards. No Featherball, but you are playing the 4 counts of Ultra Ball as well as the Chromatic. I really like this sort of Mew list. Definitely something to consider if you want to carry on playing Mew. Mew isn't dead, but only gained, if we look at it, 1 new card, which is Iona. So Mew isn't exactly going to go anywhere. It's still going to gain lots of interesting techs along the way. And kind of finishing up by looking at some of the strongest sort of archetypes, we've got to look at Gardevoir EX. This list is very similar to lists which did do really well a couple of weeks ago, nearly a month ago, with how demonstrating how good Gardevoir is as the deck. We are seeing still Zacian, because Zacian is an amazing sort of tech, especially in this sort of matchup. With its high HP, you can always guarantee those big one-hit KOs. And Reversal Energy is really good at attack to do single price Gardevoir, because that's basically 90 damage right there. We are seeing, like I said a little bit before, a high count of Iona. We're playing 4 of here, as well as 1 copy of Avery and Collapse Stadium. Very disruptive for your opponent. You really want to kind of pressure them on as quickly as possible and keep on that pressure, because if you fall behind in prizes, which Gardevoir can potentially do, you might not get set up turn 2, you might even go turn 3. So if you're behind potentially 1 or 2 prizes, Ionaing them could be really good early game, just really try and stop them around. And Super is really good to shuffle in the energies and potentially get it back through Shining Arcana. I really like Gardevoir. I think definitely it's a pick to play. We are seeing, like I mentioned earlier, very limited Champions Festival because they have very hard to get in Japan, whereas the rest of the world we can have used multiple language, where in Japan they can only play Japanese cards. I know, very funny that. And so like us, where we can use multiple different languages. So that's why it's more difficult having Gardevoir players, but not really playing as many of these really strong abilities as quickly as possible. And we'll finish up by looking at some of the fun and interesting decks, the Arcdura Umbreon list, which is doing really, really well right now, especially for us, getting really good results. And here we're seeing it as well, performing just as well. The Umbreon is really good because it's that extra gusting sort of effect. We can have cards like Boss's Orders as well, so you can try and get the extra Pokemon there. But having the ability to gust as well as disrupting your opponent for Iona is really, really good for potentially with a Judge. I really like this sort of style of deck. You still get able to attack them by playing a couple of the Darkness Energies, but it's really good to have that as that tech option. Again, if you're really scared about Gardevoir, we are seeing the Box of Disaster and the Smiling Mask sort of card. A very, very interesting list to really kind of consider. Arceus has definitely kind of found its new lease of life. It was really, really strong into Worlds, and then kind of disappeared until basically, I feel like since Scarlet and Violet got released, especially in the rest of the world, we did see a little bit of an increase over in Japan, but really we're now seeing that Arceus is here to stay. It may have disappeared for like 6 months or so, just like Giratina, but Arceus decks are really, really powerful. Another sort of fun Arceus deck is this Arceus Rayquaza. We saw this was the most hyped card going into it. I always feel like Rayquaza Rapid Strike was really, really strong with the amazing ability where you discard your hand, draw 3, and a huge attack which you can do. We're doing multiple damage for the amount of fire energies you can discard. This can work really well having cards like Armaroos as well as Magma Basement. You have a way to attach to Armaroos and then use that to energy accelerate multiple turns per game. And having Heatran as a really good attacker in the late sort of game. I think this is really interesting as it did win like a 50, it did come second in a 50-something tournament. So it was one, I like it how we're seeing these fun, crazy sort of decks which are coming from like cups and city leagues. So I really like we're seeing this sort of really innovative list which would get second place. Definitely having the disruptive ability by having Iona and Judge, as well as having more high counts of boss, so you can try and get those big one-hit KOs, and having Delphox as well as another good secondary attacker. Again, very, very fun to see. I just wanted to showcase how good Arcus can really become. And a fun sort of deck, which did also get second, is Pikachu Vmax. Yes, the craziness of Pikachu Vmax did in fact get second place, again, at a 50-something person regional. Not having Miraidon to really help your setup, but I think this is a really fun list to really showcase you. It's VMAX's, V Unions can do really, really well in this format. It has the Adventurous Discovery, it has the Arceus phone, has the Pokegear to really try and help set up to try and get out the Pikachu V Union to do those big attacks in the late game. I think it was fun to share. Nothing too much to be talk about. I don't think it's a very serious pick, but it's really fun just to talk at a deck like crazy this to get second place. And Dialga V-Star, it had loads of hype going into our format, and we are still seeing that hype can progress. Definitely Dialga is something to really look out for. That amazing Star Cronus as well as Metal Burst attack, the amount of pure setup it can get through Magnezone and Rotom in the early game to get some drawing, it's really, really strong. You should never really drop it because it did do really well overall. Getting a couple top fours, getting a couple top 8. So Dialga is definitely here to stay, but because you're playing like 20 metal energies, it's really difficult to constantly really streamline your attackers, but only having one copy of Battle VIP Pass. So I want to kind of have some closing thoughts, like where can Tina go? Like, is it going to stay with Arceus? Having Vulpix, Pikachu, Umbreon, these sort of wall sort of decks and disruptive ones, is this the way we're now going to play Giratina? Or potentially is Lost Box the proper way to play? Having single prize attack instead of relying constantly on 2 prizes to help set up the game, having these in single prizes so we can feed them to potentially be more destructive and not be afraid to fall behind by 1 or 2 prizes, whereas you fall 1 or 2 prizes in, if you're playing Arceus in an Arceus build, my opponent might only have 2 more, potentially 1 more knockout to do, or if they go with single prizes, potentially that can go up to 3 KOs they have to try and get to. So I think that potentially this is something we need to really think about as we're looking ahead to see kind of another new deck break through. I think we've definitely seen an increase in Miraidon, so Miraidon could potentially come through, but Gardevoir might be too powerful to really stop it. The amazing Psychic Embrace ability, as well as having the Shine Arcana, the refinements, the Zacian, the huge of a big attacks it can do with reversal energy, Gardevoir might potentially always be up there as a #1 spot or #2. And the meta for Nationals, which is coming up in a couple of weeks' time, which is really, really exciting to see, I could really see Giratina be up there as one of the top contending decks. Same thing with Gardevoir. I think those 2 are the decks really to test about. Lost Box, I know I may not have covered the list, but we're seeing the same things we're seeing over with us, the Dragonite and the Raichu, as well as potentially having I'm blanking on Entei as other sort of attackers. Is something which we are going to see more. Maybe not, Palkia could be the breakthrough for the meta, but something we should always be considering about is how the meta is always evolving. If we just look back at the last few weeks of the videos, we've seen it go from Gardevoir to Arceus to now Giratina, so it's always going to be evolving. So definitely on the radar to keep an eye out for Giratina. So anyway, my name is Charlie TCG. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, be sure to make sure to like and subscribe and comment down below what you think a deck which could be the breakthrough. Could Giratina really be powerful with Arceus when all of it's the walls? Or are you thinking Lost Box is the right way to play Giratina? So comment down below. I'm going back in a couple of days for some other videos, and I'll see you next week to talk to you again about the next Looking Ahead video. My name is Charlie, and I'll see you guys later. Bye for now.